some stuff I didn't know about in it. Duping idiot FDR, who fell for every one of their tricks, together with Stevenson and Bill Donovan, to transform America from an isolationist, which was a Tavistock created term, weaponized term, to an interventionist nation that massively has contributed to the destruction of our country. Now, why does this matter in regard to the coronation? What does it have to do with the coronation? Because we have people that actually think that Charles is Orthodox, and people that think that the coronation is some sort of revival of monarchy. Just idiots. Just total delusion. I mean, we either have on the one hand leftist idiots and leftist boomers who worship America and Americanism, or you can be a LARPing trad right winger who thinks with magical thinking that this is going to bring back monarchy and that Charles is some beige trad monarch. And then I even saw a so-called Orthodox profile saying that Putin should be killed because this will bring back Orthodox monarchy in Russia. And I'm just thinking how embarrassing and deluded these people are. All of them. Just no sense of basic geopolitical reality. So I think the key here for us is to steer clear of Scylla and Charybdis. Two ridiculous, stupid extremes. On the one hand, we have the extreme of modernity and the idea that scientific governance and the Great Reset will be the solution to man's problems, technocracy, and deluded boomers that think that America is still 1776 America. That delusion. Or the other delusion, the opposite extreme of the idealistic 21-year-old monarchist LARPer who thinks that Charles is beige and trad and that we're going to get a monarch that is secretly Orthodox. I mean, just literal, it's just no conception of what is really going on in the world. And what have we been here for so long lecturing on? How the world really works. So let's go to Charles Heston, of all people. King Charles. More like, I would rather have Charlton Heston as king than King Charles. And I couldn't believe it when I saw this documentary. I'm like, how this is great. So I'm going to be giving some comments on this, and I'll give you guys the documentary in a little bit. You can watch the whole thing. But we're going to do a little section of it because this is the most important section. Because you're going to learn that, no, this is how the world really works. And this is the intelligence network of the Queen and the King. Okay? This is their group. Now, who really set up British intelligence? The King and the Queen? Well, technically you can go back to monarchs, back to, the time of John Dee and Queen Elizabeth. Yeah, okay, yeah, technically you could say that British intelligence was going on back then. But not modern British intelligence. Who set that up? Oh, the Fabian circles set that up, you see. Now, there have been certain British intelligence agents and operatives who favored more right-wing things. Sure. More conservative, more traditional people that were in British intelligence. But they have not won out. They might have been anti-Bolshevik and they might have seen Bolshevism as a danger and communism as a danger. But these people didn't really understand what was going on, unfortunately. Even the really intelligent ones who were conservative, traditional, and British intelligence didn't. And they didn't understand that because they didn't know about and didn't understand who was really behind the Royal Institute for International Affairs and the Royal Society and Chatham House and Tavistock. It was not people who were longing to set up a conservative trad British Empire. No. It was people longing to set up a world Fabian socialist empire. And those are the people who set up British intelligence as we know it in the 20th century. Now, this documentary doesn't go into that, but it does tell us exactly how this model of shadow governance works, because the British intelligence model of a shadow government becomes the model for how America is a shadow government. And this documentary will even tell you about the Rockefellers' role in that. I couldn't believe it. Mainline documentary. Thank you, Chuck Heston. Now, I don't think that Chuck and any of these people are saying that any of this is bad. They're not criticizing. They're just talking about what is the historical fact.
Information gathering and decryption. A secret army was needed.
Now, this is talking about before World War II, as they're prepping for and ramping up for opposition to Tiny Mustache Man, which the British had a dual appeasement policy, meaning they had a public policy and a secret policy that they had to deal with Tiny Mustache Man, because they wanted Tiny Mustache Man to do things, to go into Poland. They wanted the war. And that's covered in detail in this gigantic 1,300-page book that we've done an entire lecture through 6 or 7 years ago. So that's not a conspiracy book. That's a book written from the vantage point of the CFR and the establishment. So we need these secret teams. Secret teams. Fletcher Prouty's book, Secret Team. Where's that come from? CIA secret teams are modeled on Special Operations Executive. Also modeled on Ian Fleming's X-Team.
It not only recruited the best British strategists, spies, and saboteurs, but foreign nationals as well. Britain was about to create the most secret organization the world had ever seen. The Special Operations Executive.
Jolly good, sir. Jolly good.
You may blow up the...
Jolly good, sir. Bit of roly-poly there. I say, would you like a bit of roly-poly?
Factory...
I would only like to snort a roly-poly. Oh, I would like to place roly-polies upon my bottom. Because we are British and we are into weird things.
You may derail the odd train, but unless you can plug in to the indigenous resistance, unless you can find men and women who are going to actually want to do something about the state of their own country, form networks of agents, networks of saboteurs, that is the essential thing.
In July 1940, the SOE recruited refugees coming into London from occupied European countries. First, they were interviewed. Then they were given a warning about the dangers they would face.
He would say, look, you volunteer to go back, but you realize if you're doing that, you're putting your life on the line. I'm putting your life on the line. You sure you want to go on with it? At which point, most of them said, of course they wanted to go on with it.
Once selected, SOE recruits went through extensive, exhaustive training to wage secret war and inflict maximum damage on the enemy.
Now, these are the secret teams that are going to be engaged in assassinations, saboteur missions, all kinds of crazy things, right? So this is what we're getting to with the SOE, the Special Operations Executive.
They learned about explosives, communications, and propaganda. Once the classroom training was finished, recruits were sent off to a remote section of Scotland.
People had about 3 weeks severe training in mountain climbing, in living off the land, in handling small arms, in handling small boats, how to get into and out of a boat without making noise.
So this is like Delta Force, Navy SEAL type stuff, right?
Useful gift in the clandestine world.
In Scotland, the recruits trained in conditions similar to their home countries.
Well, when you came up to Scotland, you came to a countryside which was more like Norway, and you felt you trained the right muscles, and you felt very much at home. If you were doing long hikes up in Scotland, you came past remote farms, and the owner would be just as annoyed as a Norwegian mountain farmer would be if you passed without saying hello and having a chat and probably a cup of tea and that sort of thing. So you felt very much at home indeed.
SOE recruits had to face the difficult prospect that they might have to use their training in lethal force in combat.
It was very brutal. Just a couple of months before we were very peaceful young chap back in Ålesund, and now you have been taught how to use a fighting knife, knowing where to stick it into a body. Sometimes you had difficulties in falling asleep at night because you were thinking what you had been taught during the day.
SOE's early missions in the war were often plagued by failure. They lacked transportation to return to the continent and were not given enough supplies.
Now, this is just the initial creation of the SOE for World War II operations, but this is going to get to a very important element when it comes to the role that the SOE and then the BSC will play in the United States. That's where it's going to get insane. It's going to blow your mind.
No shortage of volunteers, huge shortage of communications equipment, and huge shortage of the means of getting the agents back into occupied Europe. That meant either aircraft or ships. Royal Navy not prepared to take the risk.
By the end of 1941, the Royal Air Force finally began flying SOE operatives to Europe at night in what became known as Midnight Sonata.
If you've been injured in a car accident, don't call an attorney.
Not this dude. Come on, dude. Get out of here. Shoot.
While SOE struggled to train recruits and get them into the field, the codebreakers at Bletchley Park had finally succeeded in deciphering some key German codes. To conceal the fact that a German...
And this is where Turing and these kind of people, right, were working on code breaking. If you've seen Imitation Game with Benedict Cumberbatch, right? Bletchley Park, that's like, eventually you get GCHQ out of all this.
Code had been broken. Menges told no one, attributing the new intelligence to a fictional spy named Boniface instead.
And so they invented a spy, a well-placed spy in Germany, and his codename was Boniface. And so when the distribution took place, it was circulated, codename Boniface. The implication was this was an excellent source, but of course, because SIS had such a poor reputation for cultivating and recruiting good human assets in Germany, the military commanders took no notice of Boniface.
By November 1941, Boniface had been scrapped, and the highest British commanders were informed of MI6's breakthrough. Menges had quickly turned to the more...
Oh, wait, something just occurred to me. Why would we listen to spiritual authorities, religious authorities, in terms of their level of discernment, if they don't have any discernment to be able to figure these things out? And if they haven't told you of these things, why would you listen to them? Why ought we listen to them when it comes to the higher things? Wouldn't you have cognizance of the lower if you were speaking correctly about the higher? Doesn't Jesus say, can you not read the times, the signs of the times? When you see the cloud coming, you know that it's going to be a storm, or you know to bring your crop in at a certain time. And yet many of you will follow and listen to people with no discernment, no knowledge of these topics, and default to them when they haven't told you, they don't know any of this stuff. So they don't even know who's steering their jurisdictions and their churches. No knowledge of this. Never have told you this. They don't know anything about it. Why couldn't they explain this to you? Did you ever wonder that? Ever thought about that? Why would you default to that person or to these people?
Bund agency around, the product of its labors, dubbed Ultra by Churchill for its ultra-secret content, was proving to be an instrumental secret tool of war. Britain's clandestine war now had two components. MI6 would intercept and decode German military communications, and SOE would fight behind enemy lines to organize and arm a secret army
Here's where it gets
of
good.
resistance fighters in Europe. The two agencies had the same mission, but often struggled with conflicting agenda.
There are two fundamental differences between MI6 and SOE. MI6's primary aim was to obtain intelligence from whatever sources it could, but certainly part of this was sending agents into enemy territory to obtain whatever secrets they could locate. On the other hand, SOE was to provide explosives, weapons, to attack communications, to blow up trains, even if needs be to assassinate people. The one, intelligence gathering requires silence, quietness, don't make a fuss, remain undercover, whereas SOE was to make loud bangs, to create a nuisance, to attack the Germans.
This is just sabotage operations, that's all. But you're going to see why this ties into America here in a second. The next section
As
is
MI6
right here.
was struggling to rebuild its reputation and SOE was training its operatives, the British were fighting yet another secret war. It was an extraordinary campaign of dirty tricks, salacious deeds, and exotic setups. And it was being fought not against an enemy, but against a potential ally.
You see that?
While MI6 and SOE were combating the Germans, another secret British organization, the
Here you go.
British Security Coordination, or BSC,
The BSC. Key office set up. Where?
was fighting a different enemy, the enemy of American indifference.
Ooh.
The problem is that the Americans don't believe that the World War II has anything to do with them. A lot of Americans are sympathetic towards the British, but they just don't see World War II as being their war. There's a tremendous feeling of complacency, a feeling that Britain will make it through, that the Americans really don't need to do anything.
Well, part of the reason for the creation of this country was to avoid the foreign entanglements, you see. And so all it really took was a bunch of manipulation and guilt tripping. And this occurred at World War I. And that was typically done through the co-opting and the compromising of Woodrow Wilson. And we've covered that in detail in many other talks, just covered in several books that we've done. But the same thing occurs that you saw with Wilson. They basically run the same operation that was done with Colonel Edward Mandell House and other operatives to cajole a weak Woodrow Wilson, who was basically more or less a Fabian socialist himself, into supporting and becoming an internationalist in the League of Nations, the Federal Reserve, right? Those were all operations done by this power structure that we're talking about now to transform this country. And it was done by the Milner-Fabian group in the UK, allying themselves with the zillionaire robber barons in America. Rockefeller, Morgan, etc. And this mainline documentary is about to tell you that.
The Americans, determined to never again be pulled into the horrors of another world war, passed strict...
Yeah, so we didn't learn. Us dumb Jack Burtons over here in America still can't learn the lesson, can't figure out that the goober elected politicians don't call the shots. And whatever shots they do call, they're easily cajoled, co-opted, and compromised. But we just can never figure this out, can we? Why? Why can we never figure this out? People can never figure out that elected leaders don't run their governments. Steering committees run their governments. Unelected, private zillionaires run their governments. Why can we not figure this out?
neutrality laws in the late 1930s. These laws forbade intervention in foreign conflicts and thus presented serious problems for Great Britain.
It was very apparent to the British that they simply did not have the power to beat the Germans. Only if the United States could be involved in the war could Britain have a chance.
Now remember, this is not just, oh, the weak British need the help of Uncle Sam. This is a longer plan written about in Carroll Quigley's Tragedy and Hope, which is to not just bring America back under, quote, the British Empire. The British Empire knows after World War II that they're done for. But what they might do is erect a different kind of empire, a different kind of establishment. The Rhodes, Rothschild, Milner Empire, the Atlanticist power block. And they do that via allying themselves with America's secret establishment, which is just the Eastern Seaboard elite. Rockefeller, Carnegie, Morgan, Vanderbilt. The people that go to Yale, Harvard, etc., and are recruited into Skull and Bones, who become this, the OSS. It's not rocket science figuring out how this works.
Of winning a protracted war with the Germans.
Something had to be done to influence American public opinion. Britain waged a bloodless war against American apathy and used secret means to do it.
Are you listening?
People imagine that the best secret weapons are weapons that are used in secret. But there is a weapon that is used in public that can be even more devastating, and that weapon is propaganda. Propaganda is planned in secret, but is used in public. And propaganda changes the way that people think, changes the way that history unfolds.
At Rockefeller Center in Manhattan, the British Security Coordination opened up offices in 19...
At where? At where?
At Rockefeller Center in Manhattan, the British Security Coordination...
At where? At where?
About the war effort.
At where?
At Rockefeller Center in Manhattan, the British Security Coordination opened up offices in 1940, ostensibly to provide information about the war effort. In reality, the BSC was part of MI6.
Duh.
William Stevenson was a well-connected, wealthy
Intrepid
Canadian businessman and a former war hero. He was recruited to run the British campaign in America.
The British campaign in America.
Stevenson is a tough, ruthless businessman. Had been a champion boxer, flyweight apparently at one time. A very tough, hard individual. He once volunteered to kill Hitler with a high-powered hunting rifle. So this is a tough, focused individual who wants to succeed and will do whatever it takes to win.
William Stevenson waged an all-out war on American isolationists, recruiting agents willing to use any means necessary, including sex, blackmail, forgery, deceit, and, if necessary, murder.
Wait a minute. I thought we're the good guys and we don't do those things. I thought people in the West, Uncle Sam and Uncle Poofter, or whatever is the British Empire uncle. I thought we were good. We don't do that. What? Wait a minute. So you're telling me that the Milner-Fabian circle sent William Stevenson to compromise, blackmail, and kill people in the American establishment to ensure that America would enter the war, not because they really want to get rid of Tiny Mustache Man, because the British have a dual policy, the appeasement plan that Quigley talks about, because they want a war, you see. And that's why they armed Tiny Mustache Man for years into the conflict. The same people saying we must destroy Tiny Mustache Man are building up and telling Tiny Mustache Man to attack. Do you understand? Okay, these people are evil.
In order to be an agent for Stevenson, you had to be intelligent, ruthless. You know, one of the recruiting things was, I cannot tell you what sort of work you might be involved in, but if you join us, you mustn't be afraid of forgery, and you mustn't be afraid of murder.
Meeting at popular watering holes like the Stork Club in Manhattan, Stevenson, the businessman and socialite, used his extensive network of political, social, and business contacts to create an organization unparalleled in its effectiveness. Some U.S. businessmen saw the war as a financial and political opportunity and helped.
So wait a minute. We just did an interview not too long ago with one of the world's most famous living gangster. And that will come out, I'm sure, in the next few weeks. And, you know, when we think of these gangsters, when we think of the mob, we think of these figures, and you say, why are they criminals? Oh, because they engaged in blackmail, extortion, murder, assassination, racketeering. Wait a minute, so that's what makes them bad guys? But so if William Stevenson does the exact same thing to elected leaders in America, does that make him a good guy or a bad guy? All you piety signaling moralizers out there, please tell me. I'm all ears. Explain this to me. I don't hear anything. I hear silence. Oh, that's because I'm in a room alone.
Stevenson in his efforts to convince Americans to give aid to the British.
The Rockefellers gave BSC a floor, 2 floors of space, basically rent-free. And
What? Did you hear that?
Paralleled in its effectiveness. Some U.S. businessmen saw the war as a financial and political opportunity and helped Stevenson in his efforts to convince Americans to give aid to the British.
the Rockefellers gave BSC a floor, 2 floors of space, basically rent-free, and also supplied free space for a whole myriad of other fronts that BSC was running.
So, what have we said for so many years? That very thing. William Stevenson was allowed to have his office set up in the Rockefeller building for free. Why? Because there's an alliance between the Milner-Fabian structure and the oligarchic families in America, the zillionaires that run our country, the Malthusians that run our country. You understand that the same attitude of Prince Charles as a Malthusian, the Duke of Kent, Prince Andrew, they're all Malthusians, as are the Rockefellers. That's who runs things. And they run Klaus. They put Klaus there. Klaus doesn't run anything. He's put there by these people.
The privileged access didn't stop with America's pro-war financial elite. Stevenson had friends in even higher places.
The White House was...
Now, this is what a normie documentary at this point, right? I mean, the documentary's been great so far, but they're like, higher than the Rockefellers or FDR. Yeah, whatever, dude. That old wheelchair weirdo, give me a break, dude.
Very cooperative. Without White House cooperation, there is no way that Stevenson's organization could have operated in the United States.
Yeah, but the Rockefellers are going to tell FDR what to do, not the other way around, right? You think some wheelchair man that makes $100,000 a year and rolling around tells billionaires with giant skyscrapers what to do? Zillionaires? I mean, imagine believing this, that a senator that makes $200,000 a year, excluding their insider trading, tells billionaires what to do. This is what normies believe. Normies believe this. They're like, just toss out the bad apples. Throw out the scoundrels and put another crop of good boys in there. Never figuring out that the person with $1 billion always has more power and influence than the person that has $200,000 a year or $300,000, whatever a senator or whatever they make. Is that not obvious? Like, how could anybody not figure that out? Right? You don't have to know all this stuff don't you think a billionaire has more power than some goofball senator who's just some degenerate?
Was operating
imagine believing AOC really calls the shots. What?
beyond the law, sometimes in direct contradiction to U.S. law. So without the backing of the White House, J. Edgar Hoover at the FBI would simply have not allowed an organization like this to operate in the United States.
Yeah. J. Edgar Hoover, he would have shut that down if he'd have known about William Stevenson. Yeah, give me a break, dude. This is so ridiculous. Now, the documentary was like super insightful. Now it's getting super normy.
Just how far did the BSC go? In 1998,
this part's crazy.
declassified
Watch
files
this.
showed how nasty things could get if you were on Stevenson's hit list. The files tell the story of what the BSC did to Arthur Vandenberg.
So, one of the most famous non-interventionist senators, I think, at this time. What do you do with a senator blocking your Fabian socialist aims, your long-term aims? What do you guys think? What's your guess? What might William Stevenson do? Now, why are we doing this? Because this is how the world really works. What you think is a crazy conspiracy is classic geopolitics. And I'm going to show you from this normie documentary right here.
Vandenberg was a senator from Michigan and a prominent isolationist. He was also on the Appropriations Committee, a key position in 1941.
So notice, here we have a great example of who's going to win. Senator man with his, what do you think they made in the 50s? $100,000 a year? Who's going to win out? Senator man with his $100,000 a year and his senator vote? Or the Rockefellers and the Milner Fabian elites using British intelligence tactics? Who you got your bets on? Now, if you're a normie, you've already bet on Uncle Sam. Old Uncle Sam, the power of the vote. Mr. Smith goes to Washington. Old Jimmy Stewart will give him what for, while he'll tell those fat cats what the heck's up.
In that year, Congress was about to vote on Lend-Lease, the controversial program to circumvent U.S. neutrality laws and provide arms and ammunition to Britain. The proposed Lend-Lease legislation was critical to Britain, and the BSC pulled out all the stops to influence Vandenberg's vote.
British intelligence took advantage of Senator Arthur Vandenberg's weakness for exotic women by sending over Cynthia, one of their most famous...
Ooh, we don't do that, though. That's what bad guys do. Sexual entrapment, that's not a thing that the Allies do. We don't do that. That's what Stalin does that. That's a Stalin thing. We're the good guys.
Women spies whose specialty was jumping in bed with men, changing their minds.
Oh. So, compromise. Oh, that's a conspiracy theory. That doesn't exist, right? Right, boomers? The boomers out there, that doesn't exist, right? There's no laptop. There's none of that exists, right? Hunter Biden, there's none of that. That doesn't exist.
Vote.
British intelligence took advantage of Senator Arthur Vandenberg's weakness for exotic women by sending over Cynthia, one of their most famous women spies, whose special...
There's no such thing as Jeff Stein Effrey. There was no island. That didn't exist. What? That's not real. You made that up? That's a right-wing conspiracy theory made up.
He was jumping in bed with men, changing their minds, stealing their codes, whatever else had to be done.
After Cynthia had finished with him, Vandenberg's position on European affairs had changed dramatically.
What do you know?
She shows up and changes Vandenberg's mind, or at least neutralizes him, on Lend-Lease in early 1941.
Whether Vandenberg's vote was changed because of Cynthia and the BSC will never be known.
Vandenberg was a very prominent isolationist. Sometime in the 1940s, he just suddenly turned around one day and became a prominent internationalist. No one ever asked who was beside him the morning he turned around.
The BSC's attempt to influence American politics didn't stop in the U.S. Senate. In 1941, the BSC targeted the most powerful political figure in America, the President of the United States.
One of the greatest of MI6's achievements before the United States comes into the war on the 7th of December 1941 was, alas, to deceive the Americans, and in particular to deceive President Franklin Delano.
You hear that? So they're just going to deceive him with forgeries.
Roosevelt. Sir William Stevenson, Little Bill Stevenson, as he was.
This is everybody's cheering on. This is the establishment of Charles that you're all cheering on today. This is his peeps. This is how they work. All you moralizers.
Forged or had forged a whole series of documents which suggested that the Nazis had designs on Latin America.
The forgery department of MI6 created a map of Latin America and passed it to President Roosevelt.
This map is leaked to the head of the organization that became the OSS, William Donovan, and passed to the president.
With the map in hand, Roosevelt made an astounding speech on the radio.
I have in my possession a secret map.
The ancient...
So again, you understand, you're getting played. That's what I'm trying to tell you. And people are still getting played with the same play that happened at World War I. That's the same play here by these British spies. And people are getting played today with all of the same plays. It's amazing.
Planners of the New World Order.
He goes on to explain that this map,
a secret.
And he's saying, let me replay the clip because it was quiet there. He's talking about Tiny Mustache Man is going to create a new world order. I mean, okay, that's kind of true, but he's working for the Fabian elites and he doesn't even know it, who are creating a new world order.
I have in my possession a secret map made in Germany by Hitler's government, by the planners of the New World Order.
You hear that? The planners of the NWO. That's the people that he's working for. The Milner, Fabian, Rothschild, Royal Institute for International Affairs. That's who he worked for. And he doesn't even know it because he bought into this stupid fake forgery. Amazing.
he goes on to explain that this map shows Nazi plans for the conquest of Latin America.
They have divided South America into 5 vassal states, bringing the whole continent under their domination.
If America was stunned, the Nazis were baffled. But in the end, no one was more surprised and angered than Roosevelt himself.
What we have recently discovered is that Roosevelt discovered in February 1942 that he had been fooled, and his immediate reaction was to demand that little Bill Stevenson be sent home. But then, his advisors had second thoughts. Hold on a moment. We are now at war with Germany. It would be pretty embarrassing, wouldn't it, to admit that that great anti-German speech that you made on the 27th of October 1941 was based on a British forgery.
Not all of the British...
Amazing. So they were literally able to just, with simple dupery, dupe FDR. It is kind of amazing, really. And then there's another, they engage in another fake thing. We'll play this real quick here.
Propaganda documents were forgeries. In February 1941, PM, the liberal evening newspaper in New York, ran a photo story that documented startling German atrocities. They were provided courtesy of the BSC.
These photos.
So, again, more BS.
Are
BS from the BSC.
Are very, very dramatic. One photo shows young men being marched through the streets, presumably off to be shot. There are shots of people being tied to stakes, about to be executed. There are shots of people apparently with Hasidic beards digging their own graves. Very disturbing photographs. How did these photographs come to find their way into the American press? They came indirectly through British intelligence. The
Of
cover
course.
story in the newspaper says a German flyer liked these photos so well that he took them with him on an air raid over Britain but was shot down. Now that is a propaganda cover story. It's a nice story.
Shocker.
It kind of turns the knife in the wound. It says these are both horrible pictures, and there was a German pilot who got off on this stuff and liked to carry it around with him.
No,
The
baloney.
real story is that British security coordination passed them in a brown envelope to an official at the British press service.
British psyops.